Hi everyone, Timothy Ferris here with a few words about ego. Ego is a Latin term, simply means the entire self. We today tend to think of ego perhaps in terms of how you regard yourself. Sigmund Freud built an entire pseudoscience around his concepts of the ego, the id, and the superego, and so forth, and was once portrayed in a major news magazine as being on a par with Albert Einstein. The idea of the journalists was that Einstein probed the outer universe while Freud probed the inner universe. Freud, the Magellan of the subconscious, as I once called him. I had in mind that he partially circumnavigated an entity about which he never managed to gain much hard objective knowledge at all. Freud's remaining devotees now say that, he wasn't a scientist after all, but he's a great writer, because it should be read for his literary value. Doesn't read to me like a great writer. But Freud's concept of the ego is interesting when you consider that Freud was a cocaine addict, and cocaine tends to promote egoism, putting one's attention more into oneself than into the wider world. So I'm going to set aside the many theories of the ego put forth by cocaine addicts and others, and simply define it as thinking too much about oneself. Mark Twain had a great line about this. He scribbled one of his notebooks, which I'll paraphrase slightly to update the language. Good manners, Twain argued, consists of concealing from others how much we think about ourselves and how little we think about everyone else. It's kind of a perfect choice of words because Twain doesn't try to characterize what you think about yourself. Neurotics, for instance, think about themselves constantly, but usually in self-wounding, injurious terms, blaming themselves for things. Twain's point was not what you make of yourself, but that a typical person spends an awful lot of time thinking about him or herself compared to the amount of time spent thinking about others or about the wider world beyond human interactions. My take on egoism occurred to me one day on a ship in Alaska. I was on the bridge of a powerboat in one of those vast inland reaches of water, those fingers that reach in along the west coast of Alaska. It was a summer twilight. It was getting late, but there was still enough light to see for miles ahead the just barely visible little white plumes of whales spouting as they made their way in the same direction we were going. I was enjoying looking at this when the first mate came onto the bridge with some paperwork that needed to be inspected. So the white lights were turned on the bridge instead of the dim red lights that are used to preserve your night vision when you're looking outward. And we could see everything in the bridge clearly, and we could see the paperwork and all. But out through the windows, you could see nothing at all. The windows just appeared blank, just black. Once the paperwork was done, turned the lights back off on the bridge. And as our eyes adjusted, the beauty and grandeur of the wider world resumed its place as the center of our attention. And that's the image I've had ever since of egoism. Egoism consists of making the interior light so bright that you can't see that much of the rest of the world. You have trouble understanding other people's positions. Just being polite to strangers in normal interactions because you know a little bit about their job, about their orientation in the world. You're able to put yourself in their position. Just a little bit of that helps a lot in adjusting what's otherwise kind of a neurotic view of the wider universe. You can try this for yourself in any room with windows, twilight or evening. Lights are on, you have a normal life inside. Everything is immediate and familiar. Turn those lights down and the wider outer world begins to come in. That's the world that transcends the ego. My experience in astronomy has been that it can make you really happy to spend hundreds or thousands of hours contemplating things that are so vast as to have little to do with one's own life. And that to me has proved a useful way of addressing egoism. Not trying to fight it, not trying to change something intricate within yourself according to the dictates of some scholar or other, but by simply looking up, instead of focusing so much on yourself, to focus on the wider world of other people and of the universe that contains us all. Thanks for listening. See you next time.